Welcome, we're continuing our journey through Daniel chapter 11, and in this video we'll be covering verse 21. This video directly follows on from the last video about the rise of Antiochus IV, so if you haven't watched the previous video, make sure you do so before watching this. Now, as previously discussed, before becoming the sole ruler of the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus IV first co-rules the empire with his young nephew, also named Antiochus, whom we also believes he adopts as his stepson. Now, Antiochus IV is not a good man, and he does not want to share power with his nephew, as Newsom writes in her commentary, quote, "Although Antiochus IV initially ruled as co-regent with his nephew and stepson, the boy was murdered 5 years later. Antiochus IV had no intention of being displaced by the boy or of sharing real power with him. Thus, he well deserves his designation as treacherous." End quote. Now, let's pause a moment and ask ourselves the question, what evidence do we have that Antiochus IV killed his nephew? Now, this period of Seleucid history is somewhat shrouded in mystery, but we do have two sources that suggest that Antiochus IV did kill his nephew in order to take full control of the empire. The first is a cuneiform tablet, which contains a king list, and the second is a Greek historian known as Diodorus. Let's first talk about the cuneiform tablet, BM 35603. The BM stands for British Museum because that's where it's currently housed. This tablet is a Babylonian king list of the Hellenistic period, and it provides us with a list of kings from this time period. Now, the tablet does seem to have a few errors, but if we just use a little bit of common sense, it's pretty easy to spot them. The reason for these errors is most likely because literally every second member of the Seleucid family is called Antiochus, and that makes things kinda confusing. Now, let's dive into this tablet. It reads, quote, "Year 137 Elulu, Seleucus IV, the king, died. The same month, Antiochus IV, his son, ascended the throne. He reigned for 11 years. End quote. So hopefully the error is pretty apparent. It says that when Seleucus IV died, his son Antiochus IV becomes king. The problem here is that Antiochus IV is not the son of Seleucus, but rather his brother. But it's understandable why this mistake has occurred, because Seleucus does in fact have a son called Antiochus. As we discussed in the last video, it was in fact the boy Antiochus that becomes king after Seleucus IV. In the Journal of Ancient History, de Gruyter writes the following, quote, "The list, however, seems to have a major error. Antiochus IV was not the son, but the brother of Seleucus IV. Griselbeck says that the first mentioned Antiochus in the list is the boy Antiochus, son of Seleucus IV, and not, as the translation and reconstruction cited here, Antiochus IV. End quote. Therefore, according to Griselbeck, we should instead translate the text as follows. Seleucus IV, the king, died. The same month, Antiochus, his, Seleucus IV's son, ascended the throne. He reigned for 11 years. End quote. Okay, let's now continue reading the tablet. In the next section of the tablet, we read the following, quote, "The same year, Arashama, Antiochus IV, and Antiochus his son were kings. Year 142, Abu, at the command of Antiochus IV, the king, Antiochus the king, his son, was killed." End quote. Now, the issue here is that it's saying that the boy Antiochus is the son of Antiochus IV, and we know that this isn't the case. He's in fact his nephew. De Gruyter writes the following, quote, "In addition, the list is somewhat confusing in that Antiochus IV did not kill his own son in 170, he killed his adopted son, the boy Antiochus, son of Seleucus IV, the legitimate king." End quote. Therefore, this issue is really easy to resolve. It simply means his stepson, because Antiochus IV most likely adopted the boy Antiochus when Seleucus IV died. So let's make this slight alteration to the text to reflect this. Let's now review this tablet from the beginning. In the first portion of the tablet, it tells us that after Seleucus IV the king died, the same month Antiochus his son ascended the throne, and he reigned for 11 years. In the next part of the tablet, we're told that there's a period of time in which Antiochus IV and his adopted son share the crown, so we have a period of co-ruleship. Next, and very importantly, we're told that Antiochus IV actually kills his adopted son. And lastly, the tablet reads that in the year 143, Antiochus IV was sole king. And there is our summary of this tablet, which does provide very convincing evidence that Antiochus IV really did kill his nephew to become the sole ruler of the Seleucid Empire. Now, the next piece of evidence that Antiochus killed his nephew is found in the writings of Diodorus. Diodorus was a Greek historian who wrote between 60 and 30 BC. In one section of his writing, we read the following, quote, Andronicus, who assassinated the son of Seleucus, Antiochus, and who was in turn put to death, willingly lent himself to an impious and terrible crimes, only to share the same fate as his victim, end quote. Now, this quote is quite ambiguous, but we do know that Andronicus was a court officer of Antiochus IV, and what scholars believed is implied by this text is that Antiochus IV ordered Andronicus to kill the son of Seleucus, that is, Antiochus. But then Antiochus IV, to appear guiltless in the whole affair, executes Andronicus for the assassination. Therefore, the text reads that Andronicus was in turn put to death. On this Diodorus quote, Skonlik writes in the Journal of Hebrew Literature, quote, It has often been assumed, with good reasons, that Antiochus IV was responsible for the death of his nephew Antiochus. Diodorus Seleucus discusses how Andronicus executed Antiochus, son of Seleucus IV, while Antiochus IV was campaigning in Cilicia. Since Andronicus was an official of Antiochus IV, it is fair to assume that the latter ordered the killing only to execute Andronicus on his return, end quote. So, in conclusion, both Diodorus, our Greek historian, and the Babylonian king list provide convincing evidence that Antiochus IV really did kill his nephew in order to secure the sole rule over the Seleucid Empire. As always, if you're enjoying these videos, your support would be greatly appreciated, so please consider supporting me on Patreon. Find the link in the description below. If donating isn't something you're able to do, it's still tremendously helpful if you hit that like button and leave a comment. And finally, make sure you're subscribed to get my next video. Thank you for watching until the end, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.